So welcome to #Wednesdays Weekly, a weekly information session in collaboration with the voluntary sector and public sector partners. Today's session is on volunteer policies and agreements, and the host is myself, so I will begin now. Well, hello Julie. It's quite a small room today, but that's fine, not a problem whatsoever. If anyone else comes, I'll let them in. So I'll start sharing my screen and I'll just go through the presentation. Can you see that okay? Yeah. Okay, so yeah, today's session is on volunteer policies and agreements by myself, Laura Augustine, and I work for Action Together in Rochdale. And there's just a quick, let's put this on speaker actually. There we go. And there's just a quick, so a bit about me, that's me. I started with Action Together back in October 2019. I actually started as a volunteer. So I volunteered about three days a week, which fit in great with me, with having a young child as well. So while I was at school, I was volunteering, and it's something I've always wanted to do. And actually given the chance to give back some of my skills and things that I have was great. So yeah, I found Action Together, volunteered there for about a month, and then I was taken on permanently. So I'm the volunteering and admin assistant for Action Together. So that's just a bit about me there, my little picture. So we'll start with what is a volunteer policy. So a volunteer policy is a framework for a volunteer programme. It helps define the role of volunteers within your organisation and how they can expect to be treated. Your policy should outline clearly to staff, volunteers and users of the service why volunteers are involved. And if your organisation has not yet started to work with volunteers, it's the ideal starting point to consider exactly how you would involve volunteers in your work, as it includes everything from recruitment, supervision, and dealing with any problems that may arise. So why is a volunteer policy important? So having a volunteer policy in place shows that you've thought and you care about your volunteers. It communicates how volunteers are involved in your organisation. For volunteers, they can find useful information about how they're engaged. For just an example, what the procedures are for expenses, what support's available, or access to any training they may need for the role that they're doing. Helps you be consistent in how you work with your volunteers and ensures all volunteers are treated equally and fairly. And it also sets out any boundaries, so between paid staff and employees and volunteers, as to what is different. For example, employees wouldn't get expenses, and then volunteers wouldn't get obviously holidays and things like that. So this is where I kind of open it up. What should a volunteer policy include? If you have any ideas as to what a volunteer policy should include, feel free to unmute yourself and throw some ideas at me. That's not a problem.
Yeah, well, our policy just also says it's got a list of duties. Duties can include, shopping, putting a table. So it's just information, really.
Yeah.
And the aim of what we're trying to give, which is the environment and the ethos.
Got that. Oh, of course, yeah, of course.
Yeah, and that they will be given the policy for safeguarding children.
Oh, yes, that's very important. Yeah.
But anyway, it's nothing major there.
Oh, thank you, Julie. So now what I'll do is I'll stop sharing this presentation for a moment, because I've recently developed a volunteer policy for the community warehouse, which Action Together have helped set up recently. So obviously we started from fresh there, and it's completely run by volunteers. So obviously we needed a policy in place. So I'll stop sharing this for one moment, and I will share just to give you an idea of what a policy can look like, even though you've obviously got your own policy, but just as an idea. So this is a volunteer policy I developed for the community warehouse. And I do have templates available if you'd like templates to help you develop a policy, or if you want to look at it to see if anything's missing from the policy that you may have. So I'll put this together completely off the templates that I use. I find really effective when I help other organisations. So at the top of our policy, we have our mission statement. So at the community warehouse, our mission statement is: the community warehouse is a central distribution hub supporting the voluntary sector to improve access to food and supplies for the people of the Rochdale Borough with dignity and without deprivation. So just a short, snappy sentence, what it is that your organisation actually does in like just a one sentence. It's great to have that at the top, and also your logo. if your logo's not on your policy, it just adds to it, makes it look a lot better. And then we go on to an introduction, so a bit about the community warehouse, where it came from. So this was derived from a food solutions network, which we currently host. So it's like loads of partners coming together solely around food, so food providers, etc. And the aim is for everyone in the Rochdale borough to be able to enjoy food without dignity and without deprivation, especially people that struggle, that can't get food. Obviously for our members, they can use our warehouse and have that food delivered to them. A bit about what the warehouse, how we get donations in and redistribute. And then here, the community warehouse, a bit about why volunteers are important to your organisation. So here, the community warehouse is run by volunteers, therefore volunteers are extremely important and valued. Volunteers' role is vital in helping deliver support to the people and communities that we serve, and to enable the voluntary community faith, social enterprise sector in Rochdale to provide the supplies to the homes of people in crisis as a result of COVID-19. So to add a little bit in about why volunteers are important to you in your policy is a really good idea. It gives them, when they're reading through it, they'll be able to see why you're looking for volunteers and how important they are to you. We have principles at the beginning, so a few of the community warehouse principles. Always good to have this in. So just what you'll do, so we'll ensure all volunteers are properly integrated. We'll make your experience at the warehouse a positive one, and that we respect all volunteers are different, and we'll work with you to ensure your needs are met as well as meeting hours. And we recognise that all volunteers require satisfying work and personal development, and we'll work with you to achieve that. So that's just a bit at the beginning. So on to the practical guidelines that should be included in your policy. So recruitment being a main one. So a bit about how you so that's from like advertising to taking volunteers on, your whole process. So a little bit about in there about that. So we advertise obviously via Action Together's website for the community warehouse, social media platforms and newsletters. A role description for opportunities is prepared and provided by email or paper prior to the induction. And for the community warehouse, we send out a welcome pack for volunteers, so they'll be asked to complete that, which also includes emergency contact details. God forbid there's ever an emergency, we have someone to contact, a volunteer agreement, and to provide ID. That's just for our file, for our records, so we've got that on file. And then once inducted, you'll be given the days and times of your volunteer role as chosen by you in your volunteer agreement, which I'll come on to after because I'll show you the agreement as well. And then in your policy, it's good to have a bit about a volunteer agreement. So for the community warehouse, just stating that they'll get one. So each community warehouse volunteer will receive a volunteer agreement, establishing what we will do for them and what the volunteers can agree to, obviously, of our expectations for them in the community warehouse when they volunteer. You always need a clause in your agreement at least. You can include it in the policy as well. So obviously a volunteer agreement is not a contract and it should never be made to look or sound like a contract of employment. The community warehouse has no intention of creating a contract with any of its volunteers, and the agreement can be cancelled at any time by yourself or the community warehouse. So very important to have that in there, because at no point do you want it to sound like a contract of employment. On to induction and training. So a bit about how you induct and train volunteers that come into your organisation. So in the community warehouse, they will receive an induction once all forms and an ID have been completed and returned. And the purpose of an induction is to welcome the volunteers and make them feel valued, and to take them through their role and what it entails. And as part of your induction and training, it's always good to cover the volunteers' responsibilities under these three. But you'd also have safeguarding on there as well if that's what you need in your role. So equality and diversity, health and safety, confidentiality, and obviously safeguarding if that's what they need in their role. And then on training will be provided as appropriate. You can go into more detail there if you want to, but you can keep it short and sweet like that. The warehouse volunteers, we do expect them to attend the manual handling and food hygiene course. That's as and when it comes available. So I could add that in there. I could sort of incorporate that into there as well, that they will be expected to do that. But I do have it in the agreement, but they could also go in there as well. So very important, support and supervision. Volunteers would want to know how they can be supported, obviously through the role. So volunteers at the warehouse will have regular support and supervision as required throughout their volunteering role. So each volunteer that obviously comes as a volunteer coordinator, and we do hold optional monthly Zoom sessions, which is like can be a wellbeing Zoom session. It's a good place to go to find out about what's happening in the warehouse. And we've just recruited our trustees for the board, so obviously they attend as well. So it's a good place for everyone to come together. You can it's a room for anything. So wellbeing issues, feedback, progress, any questions they may have at all about the warehouse and their role, they can bring it there. Expenses, so all volunteers are valued greatly, and the community warehouse does cover expenses in whichever form they can complete. So that's like bus fares, petrol, if they're there for a full day, obviously dinner as well, something to cover what they need to buy for the dinner. Very important to have that in there. Some organisations don't offer expenses. Obviously you just put that there, we don't offer, but obviously in a bit more of a better sentence. So these are very important. Confidentiality. So most organisations will have these policies in place already. Volunteers must adhere to the community warehouse confidentiality policy, which is available on request, and it's pretty much the same for all of these. Same with the health and safety, equal opportunities policy. They need to have an understanding of it and a commitment to it. So again, they can have a copy of that. And we also have, we've put in this as well, because as much as volunteers coming into an organisation is great, but sometimes there can be issues, whether it's with a volunteer or volunteers are having issues with other people in the group or the workplace. So we do have a complaints procedure in place. So we'll just put a bit in there about that. So we aim to identify and solve problems at the earliest stage, and we have a procedure drawn up for dealing with complaints. And obviously they'll be fully supported through this procedure. So that can work either way. So a problem a volunteer has or a problem with a volunteer, it works both ways. Insurance, again, very important. So volunteers at the moment at the warehouse are covered by Action Together's public liability insurance. But once the warehouse separates completely from Action Together, because the idea is for it to be run solely from volunteers, and they're going to have their own sort of, it's going to be their own sort of charity or constitution, whatever it's going to be. So they will have their own insurance in place then. But for now, they're covered by ours because we're still involved. And then data protection, again, very important. So just let them know all the personal details will be kept in accordance with the data protection policy, which again, they can see a copy of that if needed. And that is the community warehouse policy. Some people do like to have a handbook as well. A handbook is just an extended version of a policy. But a policy is meant not to go in as much detail as a handbook, but to be a shortened down version, which is, I find, is a lot easier for volunteers to read and to understand. So yeah, so that's the volunteer policy. Are there any questions on that at the moment?
It looks good. I mean, I'm just going to ask you, can I, obviously, I presume you'll send me out a copy of
Oh yeah.
That, because there was something there and I thought, yeah, we do need to add that.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. At the end, I'll send the presentation. I'll send the warehouse examples I'm showing you. And I'll also send the templates that I use to create them as well. So I'll do that at the end. Yeah.
Yeah. Fine.
Yep. So I'll just go back to my presentation. It's not started from where I left off. Right, there we go. So a part of the volunteer policy should refer to a volunteer agreement. Now, volunteer agreement is a description of the arrangement between the organisation and the volunteer for the voluntary work and the role that they will do. So it informs the volunteer what they can expect and what they will agree to undertake, and what they can also expect from us and vice versa. So it will largely be determined by what is in a volunteer policy, but it is a specific document based on an individual's volunteer situation. So volunteer agreement should not be too formal or use language which implies that conditions could be contractual. Like I said about having that clause in there, just to let them know it's not, or we don't intend in any way for it to be a contract. The agreement should provide for a flexible arrangement. So what should a volunteer agreement include? So a few ideas here. I mean, again, it's tailored to your organisation, what you want from a volunteer and what you can give to a volunteer. But the basics kind of things that you should have on there. So to provide a full induction and any training, to provide regular support to the volunteer in their role, and a named contact, which is usually the volunteer, the manager or the coordinator. To treat volunteers in line with its equal opportunities policy, to reimburse expenses, to provide insurance cover, to implement good health and safety practice, and that's more important now than ever at the moment, isn't it? And a volunteer agreement might expect volunteers to follow policies and procedures relevant to their role. So example, the equal opportunities, health and safety, confidentiality, but also safeguarding if that's relevant to you. And to meet mutually agreed expectations around the role, such as the amount of time the role is expected to take. So a few things to avoid on a volunteer agreement. So as stated before, don't make it sound like a contract of employment, because obviously the volunteers and they're not being employed. Avoid the language of legal rights and obligations. So example, holiday pay, sick pay, things like that. Insert a clear statement on written documents that no legal contract or relationship of employment is being created. The organisation's expectations should be written in terms of hopes and not obligations. And ensure that your volunteer policy is a working document that puts into practice how your organisation works with volunteers in the way that the policy states. So things might change in your organisation, and the roles might change, or the way you work might change, and just make sure that's always continually changing your policy as well. Before I will just show you the volunteer agreement, because I think it's a really good one to show you. There it is. So this is the volunteer agreement for the community warehouse. Again, I have templates for this. So a bit about why you're important, and we hope you enjoy volunteering with us and feel part of our team. So this volunteer agreement describes the arrangement between us and yourself, and we wish to assure you of your appreciation of your volunteering with us. So just a little bit at the top there to make the volunteer feel welcome. So here, we, the community warehouse, will provide a full induction. Then just list here whatever it is that you can provide for your volunteer in their role. So we'll provide the induction and training, which a part of that is the manual handling and food hygiene, which the council put on for us for our volunteers, which is good at the moment because we do it for free. Offer you regular support, supervision, any feedback, cover expenses, provide a monthly Zoom wellbeing session, respect your skills, dignity, your individual wishes, and do our best to meet them. We will provide your insurance cover, implement good health and safety practice, ensure you're treated in accordance with the equal ops policy, provide a safe workplace, and apply our complaints procedure if there's a problem. So they're the core things that the community warehouse offers to the volunteer. And then the volunteer is just to insert their name there. Whoever as a volunteer will follow policies and procedures relevant to myself and the role I will undertake, work to the best of my ability, maintain confidentiality, make a specific time commitment. And we put this in because the community warehouse is only open Mondays and Wednesdays, 10 till 3 it operates. So morning is usually for drop-offs and afternoon is for collections. So when the volunteer comes on board, they usually tick when they want to do, and that's when we'll roll to them on. So it's a good way of tracking, obviously, when they want to volunteer. So yeah, they'll put in there. And then, so the volunteer will inform the community warehouse if they're unable to do the voluntary work, which is very important because sometimes, say we've had it with us before. The volunteer, they don't let us know if they're not coming, or if a volunteer's come through us to another organisation. They don't let that organisation know, and then the organisation comes to us, they've not turned up. So very important that they agree to sort of let you know. And then provide references if required. And more details can be found in their policies.
Do you mind if you just scroll it up a little bit? Sorry. Sorry, scroll down, sorry.
Down, is that
enough?
Yeah,
just there. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Let me know when you're done and I'll scroll up again.
Right. All right, thanks. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, not a problem. So yeah, going to the bottom, and then that's that clause again that I mentioned before. So this agreement is in honour only. It's not intended to be a legally binding contract, and it can be cancelled at any time by yourself or us. Very important to have that in there. So yeah, that's the agreement. Our agreement. I mean, you can put in there whatever's relevant to you and your organisation. You'll probably have more things to add in there, but for the community warehouse, that's what we feel. That's all we need. But again, I do have templates I can distribute afterwards. And then back to my presentation. I think I'm nearly enough at the end, actually. Yeah. So any questions? I do have templates available I can send out for the policy and the agreement, and also the complaints procedure. And so far I've supported Health Watch Rochdale, Get Up and Grow, Rochdale Dower Centre, Rochdale Football Club, and Rochdale Cycling Without Age. And if you need any support whatsoever, there's my email and my number. I'm more than happy to have one-on-one sessions to the free policies on a more personal level. And there's just a bit of feedback there from 2 of the people I supported. If you want to read through that, it's fine. But yeah, I'm open to questions. If you have any questions whatsoever, please feel free to fire away.
For me, some of the questions you already answered them in the presentation.
Yeah.
And I'm happy you're going to send us the template, isn't it?
Yeah, I've got all the template.